Welcome back to Numbers on the Board.
Numbers on the board, yes.
You tripped out, ain't you? You're not used to seeing these boys drop on a Thursday.
Yeah.
Well, surprise.
Sit back, relax, get your
This
popcorn.
Amazing interview that we just had with Adam Silver, the commissioner of the league, man. A dream come true to actually be able to interview him. He gave us time out of his busy day. So without further ado, let's just get into it. Now we want to give a very special welcome to the commissioner of our great league, Adam Silver. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
We're just going to hop right into it. We know we don't have much time. Is there anything about how the NBA is covered that you would change?
You know, it's interesting. Your companies enjoy basketball. And I mean, I respect the job the media does. And it's not a suggestion that people shouldn't ask tough questions or be critical or talk about things they don't like about the game. But I would say, and it goes exactly to your production company, Enjoy Basketball, that sometimes I think they don't spend enough time talking about why people love this game. And, you know, recently I was at a meeting with Mike Krzyzewski, former coach at Duke, and he condensed it with this headline. He said we should educate people about the game and celebrate the game. Educate and celebrate. And I feel, I wish there was more of that. I think sometimes, especially within the four corners of the game, I mean, there's so many different platforms like yours that talk about the game, so many different podcasts and blogs and, you know, TV shows, et cetera. So it's all going to be out there. But I feel like sometimes just in presenting the game to fans, that I wish they would talk more about what makes these players so great and well beyond how talented they are physically, that how much work goes into their craft, the fact that they are such incredible shooters, that what's happening with the three-point shot, how they're getting open to make that three-point shot, the sophistication of the defenses in the league. That's but you said it so well, enjoy basketball. And I think it's just the joy that this game brings to so many people's lives, that sometimes if you just looked at the coverage, and again, this is not a shot at the media or any particular announcer, because that's their job. But I feel like maybe it's more the league should be doing to uplift the game, to find ways to celebrate everything about it.
That's amazing. I'm going to kind of piggyback of Mike is saying, because I think it's very interesting that one of the most interesting things for me, at least for next season, is that we have more media rights owners here. So we will have new companies come in and host NBA games. From the commissioner's standpoint, what are you excited about when it comes to this new broadcasting deal?
Well, that's a great point. So one, having new partners come in, take a fresh look. One of those partners used to be our partner, that's NBC. So it's now, and they bring Peacock as well. And so several of the people who were involved in the NBA back in the day on NBC are still around. So they bring a certain knowledge of the game. And I think in the old days, NBC under Dick Ebersol did a fantastic job celebrating the game of basketball. And now we also have Amazon as a new partner as well. And I think they come at it sort of a somewhat new entrant into the sports television business, but nobody does digital media better than Amazon does. Nobody understands their customers better than Amazon. And so that in itself brings enormous excitement. Then you have the Disney company, our longtime partner with ABC and ESPN. They're in in the midst of moving to what they're calling a direct-to-consumer digital service, so meaning you can get ESPN directly to your devices rather than having to go through cable or satellite. And so they're taking a whole fresh look. I just saw an interview that Bob Iger did yesterday where he was saying this is maybe one of the most monumental changes in the history of ESPN, going direct to consumer that way. And it'll mean all of our national games beginning next year will be available in a digital format on your phone or tablet or whatever else. So that, I think in itself, is tremendously exciting. But then on top of that, something I've talked a lot about, I think now we think a lot about streaming games, that you're taking a game that might have been on a traditional network or a traditional cable channel, and now you have to go find it on a streaming service. And, we've gone through that transition, and the question was, would consumers be able to find a game on Amazon Prime or whatever else? And the answer is, resounding yes. The NFL has witnessed that 20 plus million people can easily find a game that's streamed. What I think people aren't talking enough about is when you move to essentially internet television, and that's what it is, you have all this new functionality you can bring to it. You can create user-generated content along with the telecast. You can be doing merchandising. You can be doing gaming and betting if that's what people want. Collectibles. You can have multiple camera angles, multiple audio feeds. Like I know you guys are partners with the Mannings. Like, for example, what the Manning cast does, I've said that's just scratching the surface, that you'll have a huge menu of different options. So if you want guys who are frankly celebrating the game like what you do, you can choose to have, in the same way you guys might be sitting and watching a game, you're talking about what you're seeing, you're talking about other things that are happening, off the court all at once. That's one kind of presentation. You may have other people who want just a pure X's and O's. And on the other, may have other fans who are new to the game and don't understand why that was a foul, or don't understand why you foul out, or why something's a block or a charge or whatever else, and sort of want, on a more rudimentary basis, want somebody to be explaining to them what's happening. I mean, there's really going to be unlimited options, and that, in terms of creating more engagement around the game, is really exciting to me.
Mr. Silver, you already so far have touched on a lot of different topics. Running an entire league is so many layers. You know what I mean? You have us media, you have the fans, you have the actual players and the owners and everything. What's some of the biggest misconceptions in your job as far as being the commissioner of the NBA?
I'm thinking one that was relevant very recently, and that is that I have the right to block a trade. The way a trade comes to the league office, the teams, in essence, it's a little bit sort of old technology. They call it in. It's like I've analogized it to if you ever bought a house where they have a closing. Yeah. And you have to line up all the documents, ensure that the person has good deed and title on the home, and everything's in order, insurance is in order, mortgages, is ready to go, be signed, et cetera. That when a trade takes place, there's largely lawyers in the league office that line up the contracts, make sure that you have the cap space that you say you do, make sure that the player's contract allows for him to be traded. There's a medical side that certifying whatever is known about the player's health and all that. But that's our only role in a trade. We don't get to weigh in on whether we think it's a good trade or not. Right. And there was a high-profile trade recently this season. I know what a lot of fans, when I was in arenas, and I certainly saw some on social media, said that the league should have vetoed that trade. And as I said, it's not my right. I'm allowed my own opinions on trades, which I don't always share. But I certainly don't have the right as the commissioner to step in and tell a team what's in its best interest.
So as basketball lovers, I want to dive into your basketball history. What were some of your favorite basketball moments growing up?
So I grew up in New York. I grew up as a Knicks fan. I'm totally neutral now to 30 teams, but I did grow up as a Knicks fan. And I would say I was a young kid at the time, but those two Knicks championships, I guess, the 69, 70s, 72, 73 teams, I grew up idolizing Walt Clyde Frazier, Dave DeBusschere, Bill Bradley, just that, that team, I loved, Earl the Pearl, and what was so wonderful is then when I got to the league all those years later, I became friends with those people. Walt Frazier is still calling games, as you guys know, for the Knicks to this day. And so it's amazing that those guys are such fixtures still. Obviously we lost Dave DeBusschere, who was a wonderful guy, but, there's a school now that is named after Earl Monroe that was created in a high school in New York City. So that's where I think I developed my love of the game. I then went on to Duke University, and coincidentally, I mentioned Coach K before. I started there the same year he became the Duke coach all those years ago.
Wow.
And it was hard not to fall in love with college basketball going to Duke. So I was really more of a pro fan growing up, but then became a college basketball fan too. And so I was a very, very mediocre player, but I more of a just playing with my friends as a kid. But I've always loved everything about the game. I think that one of the things that I find most attractive, it's this blend of individuality. in our league, I mean, you're not going to win certainly a championship unless you have talent that transcends the league in many ways. A top player, or maybe even one of the top two of the top players in the league to win championships. But at the same time, it's a team game, and even the very best players, the Michaels, LeBrons, the Kobes, et cetera, would still say, I couldn't have won without those great teammates.
Yeah.
And so to me, I analogize it a lot to life in ways, that T-shirt says basketball is life. I mean, I think that those skills that are complementary of each other, look at you guys are like a team, in the way you come together. You maybe need one more.
We always got a spot. For
the roster, but it's I think it's one of the reasons it's so attractive internationally, that when you think about the values of the game, that again, there's the individual aspect, but you also have to subjugate yourself to the greater good. You have to pass the ball, you have to make your teammates better, but also you're not going to be successful without perseverance, hard work, respecting the game. I think look what's happening in the women's game right now.
Yes.
Long overdue. We developed or started the WNBA. This is going to be the 29th season. We stuck with that, but great. And I'm seeing that not just in the United States, but all around the world, where people really talk about celebrating the women's game now. Yeah. More below the rim, obviously, than the men's game. But, a lot of crossover fans who love both leagues, but lots of people just love the WNBA or love the women's college game. And so that's fantastic to see as well.
Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit about the length of the season. Are 82 games too traditional to kind of go away from, or is change not out of the realm of possibility?
So I'll begin by saying, well, on one hand, I think tradition is very important. You do have to change with the times, and that's been my approach to most things here, which is nothing's off the table. I wouldn't say, some people say, well, you can't change the number of games or the format of the games because it'll impact the historical records. I mean, I think just with any business, you have to be willing to change if appropriate and not just be wedded to the past. Having said that, that's not where I am in terms of 82 games. I think and Andre Iguodala, former champion and all-star and now executive director of the Players Association, he makes the point that part of winning in this league is back to that perseverance I mentioned, but it's that ability to play 82 games. It's not, I don't think it's talked about enough. There is an endurance aspect to being successful in this league. And in terms of, working through an 82-game season and working at the kinks in your team and, developing as the season goes on. And so, I certainly worry about injuries. I think that's my biggest concern. And I think if there was better data, or there was data that suggested that 82 games as opposed to 72 games causes more injuries, I think we would be thinking more seriously about a change. It is true, if you're playing in a game, you're more likely to get injured than if you're not. But that's very different than sometimes this notion that you're more likely to get injured at games, 60 through 82 as opposed to games 40 through 60. And there's no data that suggests that. In fact, what we're seeing is most recently we have a higher rate of injuries early in the season. And I think that may go to, all the discussion about load management. It may be, and the data isn't conclusive, but it may be the case that because guys don't have enough load going into the season, that there's a lot of training over the summer, but a lot of it is, either weight training or individual training, and not 5-on-5, where they're really, pushing themselves physically. And then what you see sometimes with some of the players is they don't go hard in the preseason, because I get it, it's the preseason, and then they ramp up quickly in the regular season, and that's where you tend to see more injuries. So so again, one of the greatest concerns of this league is losing star players to injury, or any player for that matter. So we're very focused on that. But and I get it, 82 games. I don't want to pretend there's some magic around that. It's just where we evolved to as a league. But that goes back many decades. So I want to, if we were able to ever to change it, I'd want to be very deliberate about why we were doing it, because it's a business too, and no doubt that would have an economic impact on us. But at least now, I'm pretty comfortable with it, and I sort of buying into what Andre is saying as well, that part of winning a championship in this league is demonstrating your ability to perform at a high level over a long period of time.
I think that's well said.
Last question before we get you back on your super busy schedule. Back in 2019, you guys incorporated the flattened odds for the lottery, and that kind of shifted the way teams kind of viewed the idea of tanking. Also, you guys incorporated the play-in tournament, which we see normally before that, mid-March, we saw teams kind of fold the cards a little bit, and that has no longer happened. Do you think that flattening those odds have really impacted the way tanking or things like that have happened around the league?
The short answer is I think it's helped. It's not a perfect solution. You mentioned some of the other elements. Certainly the 65-game threshold for awards. I think the player participation policy, particularly in national games, insisting that guys play, and then, creating more incentive for competition with the in-season tournament, now known as the Cup, and then of course the play-in, where in some ways, that's more effective than we thought it would be, because we always knew it would keep some teams into contention who, frankly, didn't want to move into a rebuilding mode, but thought they were out of contention because star player was injured early in the season, whatever else. Yeah. And now, teams can see, Miami, for the first time, a 10th seed, obviously getting into the playoffs, that they can turn it on, and once you're in the playoffs, you're in the playoffs. So, from that standpoint, I think those changes have been effective. I would just say, on the other hand, that when a perceived high-value class comes along, this is a great example, analytics tell a certain story to teams, and that is that, there's nothing like a high draft pick if you want to, change your fortunes and rebuild your team. And so it means that there's still going to be an incentive for teams, as opposed to, in some cases, finishing, not just in the middle of the pack, but sort of lower down, that you might as well bottom out to a certain extent and then rebuild through the draft. And we haven't found a better solution yet. I mean, I'd say somewhat jokingly, like the way European soccer deals with that is there's relegation.
Right, yeah.
For Americans who don't follow that, you'd be like if you were, finished at the bottom of the NBA, you went to the G League the next season. That would sure keep teams incentivized. For fighting till the very end. So it's not a perfect solution where we are. I think it's gotten better, but at the end of the day, we're selling competition, and it's a little weird too, because fans have gotten a lot more sophisticated as well. I mean,
yes.
You guys, I'm sure, are seeing it too. That in some cases you have fans saying to teams, "What are you doing? Like, you don't want to finish in the middle of the pack."
I know that pretty well.
You're better off being worse. That used to never be the case in the old days. But the fans are sophisticated too, and they're saying, "Look who's coming in the draft. You're better off finishing down in the standings." And I think at least now with the draft lottery and the flattened odds, I think teams can demonstrate it's still a true long shot. The odds still may be better than not finishing a few slots down, but that's something I have no magic solution. We'll continue to look at it. Let's see what pans out this year after the lottery, and we work with our competition committee to see if there's any changes that make sense.
Mr. Silva, for real, last one. You speak of fans. I think I would let our fans down if I didn't ask you this before we got out of here. How does one become the commissioner? I've followed the game. I just turned 30 in March. I've followed the game for almost 25 years. And it's always been something as a kid, a teen, an adult. How does somebody become a commissioner of an entire league? I love the NBA, but I also watch MLB and NFL growing up, and just seeing different commissioners. And not that we want anybody to take your job. You're doing a really great job. But it's just something that I've never, understood how it can even happen.
Sure. So, one, a fair amount of luck, I think, which is the case for a lot of things in life. But you just turned 30, so right when I turned 30 is when I started at the NBA. And being commissioner is actually my 6th job at the league. So I'm a long-time employee. I'm now in my early 60s, so I've been here a long time. I will say, just the point of luck, I was fortunate in that I came to work. My first job here was as David Stern's assistant. I was a lawyer working at a firm in New York, but I had grown up, as I said, an NBA fan. I didn't know much when I was a kid about the business of sports. There was no internet. You couldn't easily look up the NBA and understand what the jobs were. At a place like this, there was no book you could buy that explained a career path in professional sports. But I was fortunate in that I met David Stern and interviewed over several months. And he wanted, at that time, to hire a lawyer to work outside of the legal department to be his assistant. And at that time, Gary Bettman was still here, who's now the commissioner of the NHL, of course. And he was running the legal department, in fact, and ran some business units here as well. But so I began as David's assistant. And then there's a fair amount of luck. I mean, I was given that opportunity, and I took advantage of that opportunity and worked really hard over the years. And I said I was in multiple different jobs, you know, and last being deputy commissioner before I was commissioner. But I would say, you know, I get these questions all the time from young people and little older people who want to be in the business of sports. And I would only say there's at the end of the day, for the major leagues, there's not that many jobs. I mean, considering how large a footprint we have, how broad our fan base is, we're relatively small organizations. On the other hand, I mean, look at now just within the NBA. You know, I mentioned earlier we created a WNBA all those years ago. That's continuing to grow. WNBA has its own commissioner, and Kathy Engelbert now is doing a fantastic job. We have our G League. We have our Basketball Africa League. We have an NBA 2K League. We've been talking about potentially starting a league in Europe. And then I look out across the board that, you know, everything from pickleball to, you know, lacrosse, women's soccer has an incredible league right now. I think there's a women's ice hockey league that was recently created. I mean, so there's no lack of interest in sports. And I think and I should add that as opposed to when I was a kid, so many the great universities and colleges have sports majors now. You can learn more about the business, marketing, sales, operations, all the different things that we do here. And so if it's something that somebody wants to do, there's a lot more ways to get your foot in the door. And I'll just lastly say, many times when I'm talking to school groups, and often I'm there with an NBA or WNBA player. I recently did something at a school in New York City with Rebecca Lobo. And the kids, their first thought is, I want to be Rebecca Lobo, or I want to be Allen Houston, whoever I was with. You know, they want to play in the league. But it's often me pointing out to them, you have a lot better chance to be me than them.
Yeah.
Because there are thousands and thousands of business people at the NBA, WNBA, and all our teams, and it's a very select few. In the NBA, it's 450 players, you know, fewer in the WNBA, fewer teams. But if you want to work in professional sports, whether you're a lawyer or an accountant or a salesperson or a doctor, you name it, all of those professions are encompassed in as part of a league. So if this is where, you know, your passion is, you know, try, if you have a shot to do it on the floor, go for it.
Yeah.
But statistically, it's a lot harder than doing what I do.
Yeah, we appreciate you taking the time. Quick little story before we get out of here. When we created Enjoy Basketball, one of the things that we had on our big and broad ideas and things we want to achieve was to interview you and talk to you. So this is a huge moment for us as a four here, but as a company at Enjoy. So again, thank you so much for taking your time.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you very much.
Hey, man, we appreciate y'all tuning in. Like KB said in the intro, this is a surreal moment. It's almost like a dream come true. Just a dude who hand I shook over 1 million times when I was getting drafted on 2K. And now actually have him in front of us. And I do appreciate his thoughtful, insightful answers. Sometimes you get these type of guests and
they dry.
He was very, he gave us
answers. He gave us real answers.
Some of my questions I didn't even get to because he answered my question and one of y'all questions.
Yeah,
so that's just very insightful stuff from Commish.
As always, we appreciate y'all. We will see y'all this Saturday for the full-blown Numbers on the Board episode. A lot of playoff basketball to talk. We'll see y'all then. We out.
Peace.
Peace.